Thank you very warmly, Mr. President, for my opportunity to make a brief contribution to this important debate. Mr. President, I experienced mixed feelings, genuinely mixed feelings, as I listened to the contribution of the Honorable Attorney General. Mixed because at times he said a couple things that took my intellectual being and my spirits very high. But for the most of his presentation, Mr. President, he took me to an abject low. And had I been prone to the phenomenon of depression, I would have been depressed here today. I am saddened, let me put it on record first of all, that the Honorable Attorney General will address the Director of Public Prosecutions the way he did here today. One would have thought that if you see, one would have, you are a young, bright, highly reputed attorney in this country. At least so you were. So you were. The last 8 months have substantially eroded that. Substantially. And I caution you, there's a life after politics. I caution you, there's a life after politics. As I experienced. And we all will. Your credibility remains your greatest asset in life, political life or otherwise. If the Attorney General, let me put it this way, I don't want to relegate my friend. I'll desist from that. But if the Attorney General was inclined to demonstrating a little more finesse and a little more class as Attorney General, he would have made these comments privately to the Director of Public Prosecution, who he has to work with in the interest of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. In the United Kingdom, there was a time when the Lord Chancellor was a member of the cabinet. He was the head of the judiciary, and he straddled, in fact, he straddled all three elements of that state. Part of the executive, part of the legislature, and part of the judiciary. And I would have thought that the Attorney General would have learned something about the way in which the business of the state is conducted. And I want to tell him...
On a point of order. Mr. President, my learned friend has to bring a substantive motion if he wishes to criticize a member in this House. But permit me to say, at no time did I say, and if I give the impression that I did not raise these matters or express these views to the DPP, that is so. But I am not saying, I'm not at liberty to disclose sacred conversations I have with the DPP of the country. But what I have done is to express my legal opinion on the matter. If he wishes to criticize me, he can bring a substantive motion.
That's right.
Hinds, it is that you must come with a substantial motion if you're going to bring into the members' conduct into this debate. But you may proceed. I understood the Attorney General to say he expressed a view on the matter.
I'm obliged. Mr. President, all I'm doing is expressing a view on the view expressed by the Attorney General. That's all I'm doing. That's all. That's all.
Senator Hinds, I'll ask you, you can contribute in the debate to the issue at hand as opposed to the personalities.
Yes, indeed. Certainly, but I rose here during the Attorney General's contribution when he attacked the personality of another Attorney General who is not here to defend himself. And I agree with you, Mr. President. I agree. Mr. President, we are here today to debate the bill, the Prevention of Corruption Amendment Bill 2011. And the objective of this bill is to amend the existing act, and it is designed to implement further and more effective measures to prevent corruption by establishing a corruption commission for receiving and investigating allegations of corruption, increasing the number of corruption offenses and corruption-related offenses, and providing protection for informers or whistleblowers. Mr. President, we are debating a motion to take this before a joint select committee, the Attorney General was a little more substantive in some of the things he said about the bill itself. So I must venture there. The first thing, Mr. President, is that the Attorney General criticized the Integrity Commission and its operation on the basis that, and he gave an example where they had before them a particular inquiry, a radio license matter. They looked at it. They sent the matter to the DPP, and so far, nothing was done. He doesn't know what was done since then. He can't know. The Director of Public Prosecutions does not have investigative powers himself. So it is very likely, and in fact the procedure is that he would have sent that to the police commissioner, and elements of the police service would have continued the inquiry. It is not the first time. It is not the first time. And it might very well be that so far the police have not been able to come up with any substantial evidence to bring the matter to the court. But to suggest and to imply that there is some other reason why it has not yet been done is quite simply wrong and improper. It's not the first time. I know of a situation where the current leader of the opposition, the Integrity Commission of which the Attorney General spoke, sent a matter to the Director of Public Prosecutions, and that was sent to the Commissioner of Police. About 2 years it remained with the Commissioner of Police. It was only when the matter was eventually resolved in the High Court, it transpired that the police could go no further because there was absolutely no evidence against the member for Diego Martin West, who was the subject of that inquiry. So it is not new. When it is sent back to the DPP from the Integrity Commission, the DPP, not having investigative powers, sends it to the police, and it is the job of the police to get the job done. And if they get sufficient evidence, then they will lay charges and work along with the Director of Public Prosecution. Now, the Attorney General came here today and tells us that they want to establish a permanent commission, which will work in conjunction with the Integrity Commission. And what I thought that this young, well, that is beyond dispute. His brightness is not, he may not be tree bright. His brightness is now in question. Because what I thought I would have heard from the Attorney General today is a clear statement to this House demonstrating the differences between, or the difference between what he is proposing and what now exists. Because this commission that he is proposing does not itself have powers of arrest, as far as I understand it. So when it would have completed its investigation, just like the Integrity Commission, their report would also be sent to the Director of Public Prosecution, just like the Integrity Commission, who will send it to the police, just like the Integrity Commission. Well, tell us what's the point.
The point is, yeah, sure.
Originally.
Well, maybe if you listened, you would have heard it. The point is, Mr. President, that when the Anti-Corruption Commission completes its investigation, there would be no need to refer to the police, because the Anti-Corruption Commission, unlike the Integrity Commission, the Anti-Corruption Commission will be clothed with the legislative authority to conduct an investigation in a way that would enable the DPP to receive the evidence and lay a charge. What happens now, as opposed to what happens now, which is that you have two investigations. That is what you're trying to prevent.
President, I will tell you categorically, my perusal of the legislation before us does not represent that at all. That does not appear in here. It does not. And I have to be guided by this. I cannot be directed or guided by what you say. Because as I told you earlier today, in the 8 months that you have been with us, you have discredited yourself and your previous reputation tremendously. It does not appear in here. So what you find, what I suspect, Mr. President, what I suspect is that the Honorable Attorney General, hot and sweaty, to use a colloquialism, if I'm permitted, he goes into the office of the Attorney General, he finds a whole host of legislation developed to one level or another inside of there, wanting to come and give this nation the impression that he's doing so much good work, runs around the office, picks up whatever he finds, without even reading it properly and understanding it, he brings it to the parliament. And when they come to the parliament with deficient legislation, not well thought out legislation, as they have done before, you know what the resolution is? To send it to a joint select committee so that we will sit in joint select committee and trash it out and fix it, and then he'll come back here. That's what they've been doing. This is gross incompetence and inefficiency in the extreme. And this coming from a people's partnership, so-called, which we knew all along. This is why we always called it a UNC-led coalition. And now we know it's UNC proper. Mr. Myers told us that. Hurt, incompetent, and inefficient to the core. And I said before, I say again, look, we're dealing with an issue of corruption. There are volumes written about corruption. I have a text before me, Governance, Corruption, and Economic Performance, written by George T. Abed and Sanjeev Gupta, right? Talking about corruption. I came here today ready to discuss corruption as a concept. I know we have had issues with corruption in Trinidad and Tobago. Some former journalist wrote a speech for the Attorney General. He should be fired. Because the Attorney General, reading that speech, came here today telling us about Johnny O'Halloran. So I had to ask him if this bill will go after Johnny O'Halloran. And lock joint. You could hear that that was coming from the mind and the pen of a man 3 times his age. He should be fired. And the Attorney General quite wisely threw the speech aside, and then he spoke extemporaneously. But whenever he does that, he gets into trouble. I am surprised he didn't ask us about a piano again today. Anytime he tries to speak extemporaneously, he gets into trouble, serious trouble. So that I came here prepared to discuss this business and to see, as a senator in this house, as a citizen with access to this parliament, as a citizen who has had access to governments, how we can improve our legislative, our administrative processes to make this country a more efficient and corruption-free platform. And I was expecting better of you. So that I sat here and listened to you intently and came away from it dissatisfied. My thirst for information unquenched, as it were. So I now feel, in light of the fact that this is not a motion to deal with the substantive issues in here, but rather a motion to take it to a joint select committee so that we could all sit and fix this thing. I'll tell you what, it was sitting there for 8 years. It's probably because the previous administration and those who had the office, who held the office that you now hold, probably considered that in relation to the Integrity Commission, this was not taking us very far.
Why did they hire Stephen? Why did they hire
But unthinkingly, the Attorney General grabbed it up and he brought it here to waste our time. And we are here to discuss a motion to take it to a joint select committee, where we will go through clause by clause and we'll analyze to see whether it's valid, whether it takes Trinidad and Tobago forward or not. And I sat here, you see, he's continued to behave in a certain manner. But let me, since he raised substantive issues, raise some of the issues that I wanted to deal with in this debate. Let me raise it. First of all, Mr. President, I would like, quoting from the text that I cited a while ago, at page 24, to offer a definition of corruption. The authors say, corruption has been defined in many ways, each lacking in some aspect. However, like an elephant, it may be difficult to describe corruption. Yes, like an elephant, while it may be difficult to describe, corruption is generally not difficult to recognize when observed. Unfortunately, the behavior is often difficult to observe because acts of corruption do not typically take place in broad daylight. The most popular and simplest definition of corruption is that it is the abuse of public power for private benefit. From this definition, it should be concluded that corruption cannot exist within private sector activities. Let me read that over again. From this definition, it should not be concluded that corruption cannot exist within private sector activities, especially in large private enterprises. This phenomenon clearly exists, as for example in procurement or even hiring. It also exists in private activities regulated by the government. Sometimes the abuse of public power is not necessarily for one's private benefit, but for the benefit of one's party, one's class, tribe, friends, family, and so on. In fact, in many countries, some of the proceeds of corruption go to finance the activities of political parties. Mr. President, it is important, this definition, simple as it is, because a large chunk of government expenditure and a large part of the development program that accounts for serious chunks of the national budget is in fact carried out by private companies, not so much the state or the government per se. Persons bid for contracts, sometimes they don't bid, and so that the private sector, corruption in the private sector is very, very important. Very important, because they account for a lot of the expenditure that taxpayers put up to carry out government's plans and policies. And I know, before you touched it, it was drafted, and that was thought out. You have added nothing to it, you've just brought it here. So now I'm pointing out to you some of the elements of it, and you should be grateful. Sit tight, sit tight. I'll use Petrotrin as an example and the board of Petrotrin in a short while. But take your time. Take your time. We will come to that shortly. Yes. Mr. President, so that I would have thought that the Attorney General would have educated us, would have told us something, and most of all, as I have said before, demonstrate the difference between this new commission, which, interestingly enough, unlike the Integrity Commission, where all the members are appointed by the President of this Republic in consultation with the opposition leader and the leader and the Prime Minister. But the President appoints the members of the Integrity Commission. And I am told from their practice that they all, when they meet and sit, they act independently. Nobody could tell the other how to think, what to do, and what the deliberation should be, much like the independence in this House. But in the proposed legislation before us, once the Chief Commissioner, the head, is appointed, he is the one who identifies the other commissioners. So effectively, you have a one-man show. And I would have thought that the Attorney General would have told us what are the benefits of that, how that would work, and to what extent, look, I'll do that. And to what extent, this thing, forget us, we are not now in government. I want you to read an article written by one of your apologists, a fellow called Peter O'Connor. I read him since the elections. I decided to sacrifice some precious time. I give him about 6 minutes to read his article occasionally. And I saw him, he's a defender of your government. I don't know what he wants. Because a lot of, look, I was about to talk about a lot of journalists who end up in your embrace, you know. I don't know what he wants, but I heard him singing for the last 8 months, telling the nation how good you were and how the Prime Minister has to watch her back and what the PNM planned to do. Well, in his last article, he sounded exasperation. You must read it. He and all fed up all here already, Mr. President. The UNC-led coalition before us is the worst little government we have ever seen in a long time in this country. The worst. The worst. And they you know, the PNM, Mr. President, as a former government, we had we acquired over the years a core support. People who understood what the philosophy of the PNM was about. So we have that. The UNC, for other reasons, acquired a core support too, although they only spent 6 years in government. But what makes the UNC-led coalition that we now have to contend with more disappointing and disheveling to people is that they attracted people who did not form part of their core support. These people were expecting change. They were expecting something new. They were expecting something different. And they have disappointed. That's the point. He spoke about the previous administration, and I'm responding to this. We are a 55-year-old party, and the Constitution of this republic enshrines, if you like, the political party. It is written in, I think, section 74, party government. We have been in government for about 40 years of the 55 years, Mr. President. And for all that time, I want to tell my friends, for all those 40 years, you could count on your hands with change the number of those who spoke for the PNM in this parliament, minister, parliamentary secretary, whose names got tainted with this brush of corruption. You could count and get change. They spent 6 years in government, and you could count on your hand and get change those who were not tainted with corruption and who didn't find themselves before a court. So that the people of this country understand the thing, you know. They know we had 1 or 2 persons who went against the tide, who breached the PNM philosophy and did not hold fast to the principle, the high principle of morality in public affairs. But by and large, listen, Mr. President, let me get back to the text that I was quoting from a while ago. I don't want to be distracted by my friends with politics. I will never be. Mr. President, this text continues under the rubric indirect causes of corruption. And it says, and I quote, besides the factors that promote corruption directly, discussed in the previous section, other factors can contribute to corruption indirectly. Other factors such as quality of the bureaucracy. What the writers are saying here is that when you have a higher quality bureaucracy, you tend to see lower levels of corruption. Lower levels of corruption. Mr. President, so that the quality of the bureaucracy is important. In some countries, the authors explain, public service is seen as a very laudable thing, prestigious and full of prestige and status, and in other countries much less so. But that they say, and these are experts, that they say affects indirectly, is one of the indirect causes of corruption. Level of public sector wages, and I quote, over the years, many observers have speculated that wages paid to civil servants are important in determining the degree of corruption. Lindbeck, in 1998, attributes low corruption in Sweden in this century, partly to the fact that at the turn of the century, high-level administrators earned 12 to 15 times the salary average of an industrial worker. One can speculate that there may be corruption due to greed and corruption due to need. We have a case in this country I saw about 4 years ago where a police officer in San Fernando was charged for accepting a $60 bribe from a taxi driver. And when I read that a few years ago, I felt pain, I felt sad. And I did all the intellectual gymnastics I could to understand what would persuade a man to accept a bribe in the first place. But more significantly, a bribe of $60. Right? We have a man in this country, a former councillor, who reported to the police. And the matter is now before the very DPP that the Attorney General spoke about. That and he's on sworn testimony, and his testimony led the DPP to go to the court and tell the court it will proceed no further in charges against certain persons, Mr. Franklin Khan Mr. Franklin Khan. Right? The DPP went to court and told the magistrate that he will withdraw because there's no evidence against Mr. Khan. But that declarant, Mr. Dansam Dansuk, because this is on the record, told the DPP in a sworn statement that what he had said previously about Mr. Khan was not true. And in fact, he colluded with a certain practitioner and a certain journalist to have concocted the story against him. But Dansam Dansuk had admitted and was given immunity from giving a bribe. And then I'll tell you further, because I said it here twice. There's a matter before the police commissioner right now, where a certain member of the current cabinet of Trinidad and Tobago, you are Johnny come lately, they just thought about you belatedly. You know, nobody, I mean, and now I notice you are enjoying superior status over the substantive minister because I am afraid he's my friend. I have great honor and respect for him, but you all have put him in a position where nobody takes him seriously anymore. And I am angry with you all for that. I am personally affronted by that. You all have put the Minister of National Security, a dignified man with a proud track record of service in this country, a man who I told you before I looked up to, you all have emasculated him. Somebody gave him a piece of paper that caused him to humiliate himself in this parliament.
Mr. President.
You could get up and say what you wish.
Senator.
Quite apart from the rudeness of the honourable member. 35-1, I don't know that any reference to the Honourable Minister of National Security in this debate is relevant.
Not about relevance, but I did think you were bordering on expressing something about his conduct.
No,
I said bordering,
no,
but we won't go there.
Mr. President, let me make it very clear. When it comes to the conduct and the reputation and my personal regards and respect for the Brigadier Sandy, it is unchallenged. Unchallenged. If I may be permitted another colloquialism, a very good horse, but in the wrong stable, Mr. President. Have no place there. And then a few nights ago, he was in Rienzi Complex. I always thought that he had come into this. Honest to God, you may call me politically naive, but I really thought when I saw him appear and sworn in as Minister of National Security that he was part of the COP. But it's when I saw him in a photograph the morning after a big fete in Rienzi, when they celebrated the victory of their political leader, I saw him in a yellow shirt with a UNC monogram looking. Oh, yes. Oh, yes. I said, Mr. President, just as somebody threw him a document that he got up here and read, I feel that evening he went down to Rienzi looking as smart and as elegant as he always does, and somebody threw him a yellow shirt. It can't be real. Can't be real. What is he doing there? I don't know. Mr. President, let me not be distracted with the politics, and let me continue with mine. I don't wish to stop distracting me. I want to deal with corruption. Mr. President, I was reading for you some elements of the indirect causes of corruption. Penalty systems is another indirect cause. Following Gary Becker's 1968 classical analysis of crime prevention, given the probability that the perpetrator of a crime would be caught, the penalty imposed plays an important role in determining the probability that the criminal or illegal acts would take place. In other words, serious penalties. And implicit in this is the suggestion that the persons would be caught. I want to tell the Honorable Attorney General, in all seriousness, Honorable Attorney General, your time would be far better spent. Forget the PNM now. Over the last few days, in an act of governmental corruption, which you all are now working hard to cover up, over the wrongful and stupid appointment of a rookie in the SIA to a pristine position to head the SSA, an organization, Mr. President, which was to take in the Special Anti-Crime Unit and the Security Intelligence Agency. They were to be combined in the SSA. And they took this rookie, this unknown, unqualified, and caused her to be the head. And today, that government who come in to tell us today about anti-corruption commission, they are all engaged in a cover-up, not answering pertinent questions. They don't want this country to know that while the note to go to cabinet for appointment went through the ministry and the Minister of National Security, the recommendation and the resume did not. He didn't see it. It went straight to the Prime Minister, straight from the SIA. They don't want us to know that. They don't want us to know that someone called Julie Brown, who was to evaluate Ms. Ramnarine, she too put a reference, a recommendation. So she's evaluating her, but she is recommending her. That is corruption. And you all, yes, corruption is not only about money. This is why, you see, if you had read a text like this before coming here, you would not have humiliated yourself as you have. Corruption is not only about money. And you said so at the beginning of your speech. In fact, you read that when you were reading until you disposed of it. And now they're involved in a cover-up. Brushing aside the media, don't want to answer questions. Pathetic as you could have it. It's also corruption. See, look, Mr. President, let me continue here. So I spoke of penalty systems. Transparency of rules, laws, and processes are, according to the authors, another indirect contributor to corruption. In many countries, and I'm quoting, the lack of transparency in rules, laws, and processes creates a fertile ground for corruption. So as we know by now, ought to know, transparency and accountability are important buttresses against corruption. Things happen in the dark, and they need to be made to face the glare of the light. And scrutiny by the parliament, by the courts, by the population. Right? Transparency is so important. Some countries, for example, New Zealand, have made great efforts in recent years to bring more transparency to all accounts and actions of the government. The other indirect, and I mean, I don't want to spend all the time reading on these, processes and procedures on policy matters and other actions, for example, competitions for public projects are equally opaque. So at times it is difficult to understand and determine the processes that was followed before a decision was reached. In the case that I have just spoken about, the appointment of Reshmi Ramnarine, all the country wants to know is what was the process. They want to know it in everything. They also want to know why one minister of government went to object to a fete in St. Joseph and the other one came out and attacked him in public and said, I want the fete. They want to know if it's because he was a DJ and he had something to benefit from the fete. They want to know that. As a DJ, I don't know. The public want to know that. And the newspapers even made reference to Hurricane George. I will never call him Hurricane George. I call him the Honorable Minister. came down on a hurricane in like a hurricane in St. Joseph on poor Mr. Volney, who had just recovered from illness. Yes? I tell you, I'm coming to Petrotrin in a little while. You're talking about attack, you're reminding me, oh, come quicker, you know. Right. Mr. President, other indirect examples of leadership, and I will be quoting the former Prime Minister, Mr. Bastio Pandey, and talking about Mr. Bastio Pandey on the question of corruption. Rafik Shah, in an article on the weekend, Mr. President, told us that as they were putting together their heads, union leaders, to plan for being the government of Trinidad and Tobago to offer this country good governance to protect it from corruption, after such formal meetings, they would meet in a rum shop also and take one. And he explained, as they were discussing corruption and other such matters, and ideas to bring legislation when they, if and when they became the government as the ULF, he explained in his article, Mr. President, that sometimes a drunken man or two in the bar would approach them and offer unsolicited political advice, as they are wont to give once they see a politician. On many occasions, when they see these ne'er-do-wells, they would think that that would be the last of them. But alas, when screening in the ULF, UNC reach, they would see some of the fellas show up. And Rafik Shah said that the previous leader of the UNC would insist that if these people are not recruited as councillors or so, he go and he mash up the whole thing. And Rafik Shah wondered in his article whether the same thing is not happening now, except it is happening in more...
Mr. President, what is the relevance of this, pray tell? I mean, you know, this is making a mockery of the parliament. What does that have to do with corruption? Rafik Shah's article, please. Let's get back to the debate.
I'm sure, Senator, you'll...
Yes, indeed. Mr. President, I'll tell you what it has to do. I was just coming to the point, I was just giving the example in advance. In terms of the indirect causes of corruption, one of the headings, Mr. President, examples by leadership. And this is what is said. A final contributing factor is the example provided by leadership. When the top political leaders do not provide the right example, either because they engage in acts of corruption or, as is more often the case, because they condone such acts on the part of relatives, friends, or political associates, it cannot be expected that the employees in the public administration and people in the country would behave differently. That's the point. That's the point. That's the relevance. And as it now stands, we, the Attorney General, came here today telling us that we must grapple with this question of corruption and that we should support sending this bill to the Joint Select Committee to discuss it. And without considering that the example by his Prime Minister and his political leader encourages corruption based on what I have just read. So Mr. Shah was wondering whether the same thing that he described in the article still happening now. How did Reshmi Ramnarayan come to be appointed? In what circumstances? Was it in a bar? Was it in a disco? That's what the country wants to know. And confidence is a critical piece. We want good governance. I myself, opposition as I am, but patriot as I am as well, I was hoping that you would have done well. But I must repeat, it is the worst little government we have seen in a long time. We told this government that it had to be watchful of the fact that a senior cabinet member continued to hold high office in an international organization called FIFA. They ignored us. We told them that they should not have appointed Mr. Nizam Mohammed as chairman of the Police Service Commission. They scoffed at us. And today, the nation, not the opposition, the nation is wondering what is Mr. Nizam Mohammed doing in that office? Because he was confronted by two police officers in Port of Spain, failed to comply with their instructions, Rather than respond by producing documents, he produced his cell phone, called the commissioner. The commissioner got involved, and they mediated what was a criminal charge or potential for a criminal charge. And I want to know how many other citizens of this country can expect mediation when the police confront them. That is an unfair advantage that somebody may have gotten. And corruption is not only about money. It is about leadership by example. That Attorney General came in the other place and raised issues about a piano and made the Prime Minister's National Security Advisor, a fellow called Gary Griffith, caused him to tell the public, and it was reported in the papers, that the piano was hidden under a piece of cloth. That is the extent that they have gone to. No regards for truth, no regards for honor, no regards for dignity, no regards for class, no regards for the COP, no regards for anything good in this country. Bunch of vampires in political terms. You should be ashamed to mention the word piano again. You are shameless. You should not even mention that. And Mr. President, I told
Mr. President, Standing Order 35-4, I think, Senator, is bordering on a bit of offensive language. 35.
I didn't hear you. You said he was bordering on.
Bordering on offensive and unparliamentary language. Please, vampires, sir.
Well, I gathered that he wasn't speaking about any specific person, but of course he will continue.
Mr. President,
For us.
as an attorney at law, trained and suitably qualified so to practice, I must not bring my personal sentiments into these things, but I was just about to say how much I admire you, Mr. President. Your good judgment, your sound. I was only remembering Black Stalin singing a song about vampires passing. Keep the chalice burning, vampires passing. That's all I was remembering. Mr. President, as I wind to a conclusion, unless, of course, if they provoke me further, as I wind to a conclusion, I had said here before that Charlottesville is a quiet place in Tobago, attracts tourists, and tourism brings money to our treasury. And it is out of the treasury that a lot of the corruption that we are preventing takes place. So what is in Charlottesville is very important to me. What is happening with tourism in Charlottesville is very important to me and to all of us, because tourism brings income to Trinidad and Tobago. Income is what sets up the consolidated fund. That is the money we use to provide laptops, as the Attorney General said, health facilities, education, and all the other things that we are supposed to. And it will cost money to establish this anti-corruption commission. Tourism in Tobago is important to me. This is why I was concerned when I told you before, someone told me about the seagulls. About the seagulls. Yes. Yes. You remember, Mr. President, I did say to this house that a friend of mine saw thousands of seagulls descend on Charlottesville. And, you know, the outstanding features of those seagulls is that they made a whole lot of noise and a whole lot of mess. Mr. President, this government reminds me of seagulls in that ecological sense. They make a lot of noise and they make a lot of mess. This bill is messy. Not worthy of this Parliament's consideration, really. But it is here. This needs to have been thought out a whole lot better by the government before coming to Parliament to waste our time. 8 years, we considered a lot of stuff, okay? And considered that this bill was not worthy to be brought here. You just running hot and sweaty, and here it is, you brought it. Mr. President, I told you they are beginning to provoke me. And I need your protection, Mr. President. I need your protection. They are beginning to provoke me. So, Mr. President, what we need as a buttress to some of the corruption that is taking place, given that we have now all agreed that corruption is not only about money, given that we have now all agreed that corruption is not only about money, what we need to see in this country is some more equity. They would not know it because they're too busy enjoying the benefits of the cushy offices that they now occupy. But the people of Trinidad and Tobago are crying. Many persons, I met someone this morning in the bank who told me, just outside of the bank, yes, he showed me. He said, my contract expired a month ago, and what? They terminated me. People are complaining that there is political discrimination across the government sector.
The time of the senator has expired.
Mr. President, I beg to move that the speaking time of the Honorable Fitzgerald Hinds, good senator, be extended by a further 15 minutes.
Senators, the question is that the speaking time of Senator Hinds be extended by a further 15 minutes. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those against say no. Senator Hinds.
Thank you very warmly for the extension. I was saying that people in the nation are crying. They're suffering at the hands of this government. Everywhere you turn, in the Ministry of Education, in the Police Complaints Authority, across the public service, people are receiving, and I'm saying this now, you could get up and doubt it, people, high-level public officials are complaining that they're receiving phone calls from the Attorney General urging them to go, tormenting them, calling them at their home. Nonsense? Stand up and say it's nonsense. Let the citizen listen to you.
That's absolute nonsense. Errant nonsense.
Okay. Well, you know, the good thing is, I was not privy to the discussion. A senior public official, and I mean very senior, for you to go and victimize the woman? For you to go and victimize the woman now? She's afraid of her job. You all are tormenting her out of her job. And she wants to know, she's looking for protection. She and thousands of others in the Ministry of Sport, in the Ministry of Youth Affairs, Education, all across the platform. In national security, the people in the SIC crying, and the SIA crying. You are the Attorney General, you know. I tell you, be careful, you know. You be careful, you know. You are the Attorney General. You may not know it. You may not understand it. The shoes may be too big for your feet, but you are the Attorney General. Right. So, Mr. President, they are saying that there seems to be a wave of political discrimination. We saw the Minister of Labor, and that is corrupt. We saw the Minister of Labor having to tell this country, I am not just firing people just so. It goes against my own inner beliefs and feelings and my trade union philosophy. Aaron McLeod, the Minister of Labor, told this country not doing it. People are even at the point now where they are beginning to wonder whether it has something to do with ethnicity. People are beginning to wonder that. And I want to let this government know that people on the ground out there are saying that. And you all need to address it. That's what I'm saying. And all of that is serious corruption. Serious corruption. So, Mr. President, having promised myself that I would not utilize all the moments of my extension, I would like to suggest that rather than, well, I think the government, you know, rather than waste our time, I think the Attorney General should really take this bill back. I think what they should do, rather than send this bill to Attorney General, rather than send this bill to a joint select committee, what they could do after the contributions this afternoon is to stand down the debate, adjourn the debate, take this back to your cold, air-conditioned office, get a serious team of thinkers together, think it through, and then come back to this House. Because if you send this to another joint select committee, it would be one of several that has so gone. It is putting a strain on the staff of the Parliament, the Hansard reporters, the clerks. It is utilizing resources of the Parliament that we could save in the interest of efficiency. It is, some time ago, I was unable to attend a certain meeting and chair it. And some of my learned friends, as soon as the meeting had to be aborted, because I was unavoidably absent because of a pressing and urgent personal emergency, they called a press conference and tried to scandalize the situation. It is putting a strain on all of us. So rather than send this to another joint select committee, I urge you, after hearing the contributions of members here today, adjourn this debate, go on to something else, take it back over the road, think it through soberly and seriously, if those are possible coming from you. And then we could go forward. And if they so do, they may very well find that the Attorney General, having gone there and met a lot of bits of legislation, he needs to study them more closely, read them more carefully, and then bring them to the public domain that is the Parliament. Mr. President, with those very few thoughts, presented in a manner embellished with some class, and deliberately so, because I wanted to demonstrate to the Attorney General how the thing ought to be done, how the thing could be done. Having successfully completed my mission, may I take my seat? I thank you.
Senator Ram Galawan.